She was a pregnant outlaw's widow, fleeing for her life, until a wealthy rancher offered his name. "Do not think that baby in your belly will make me spare you, Maria," the man growled, leaning across the cracked wood table, the lamplight casting his scarred face in flickering shadow. The revolver at his hip gleamed every time his hand twitched near it. Maria didn't flinch. Her voice was steady, low, and sharp as a blade. "Then I'll die a widow, not a traitor." The saloon was nearly empty, its warped floor creaking with every gust of wind slithering through the broken boards. Outside, the Texas border night howled like it knew secrets, and inside, only the barkeep dared to look up from his glass polishing. The man opposite her was Ramon Losa, second in command of the Cortez gang, and now its de facto leader since Xavier Cortez had been shot down in the canyons north of San Luis. His boots were caked with dried blood. His breath stank of tequila and power. "You were his wife," Ramon hissed, tapping the butt of his pistol. "That means you know where he stashed the take. We all know he told you. That fool loved you too much not to." Maria's hands were folded over the swell of her stomach, fingers laced as if in prayer. But there was no God in that room tonight, just her unborn child, and a devil trying to drag her down. "I don't know where the money is," she said, "and even if I did, I wouldn't hand it to the man who stood by while my husband bled out." Ramon's eyes narrowed. "Careful how you speak, girl. I stopped being a girl when Xavier died." There was a beat of silence. Then Ramon shoved the table aside, the wood screeching against the floor. Maria stood too, fast despite the weight she carried. Her heart pounded, but she did not show fear. She had spent years learning to mask it, living beside guns and blood and lies. She had kissed a man with fire in his hands and death in his pockets. Now she had nothing left but the child inside her, and the remnants of a name everyone wanted to erase. Ramon's hand hovered near his pistol. Maria met his gaze, her voice colder than the wind outside. "You won't shoot me here, not with the sheriff 2 doors down and too many witnesses. You came to threaten, not to kill." He sneered. "Not tonight." Then he stepped back, turned, and spat on the floor. "You won't get far, Maria Cortez. You're heavy, you're alone, and every eye between here and the Pecos knows your face." He pushed through the doors and vanished into the night. Maria exhaled slowly, her fingers shaking only after he was gone. The barkeep said nothing, just slid her a half-empty glass of water and a nod of sympathy. She took neither. By midnight she had slipped out the back with nothing but a small satchel, inside a bundle of faded letters, a silver locket with Xavier's initials, and a roll of stolen bills she had taken not from his gang, but from the lining of his old coat. The child inside her kicked as she mounted a mule she had bribed loose from the stable boy. She whispered into the night, "Hold on, little one. We're not dying here." She didn't look back as the saloon lights faded behind her. The moon cast a pale path over the desert brush, and each mile between her and that rotten town was a mile earned in blood and fear. She rode through the black hours, wind cutting through her cloak, dust sticking to her skin like regret. Every distant howl made her fingers twitch toward the knife tucked in her boot. In the quiet space between stars and sunrise, Maria let her mind drift, just for a moment. She thought of Xavier, of the nights they had laid under a sky like this, his rough hands brushing her belly before it showed. He had promised her they'd be free one day, that he'd leave the gang, start clean. But freedom had a price, and he had paid with his life before he ever found it. Now she carried the weight of his sins and the only piece of him left that mattered. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew who was chasing her. And she knew she had to keep moving, because the child inside her was not just blood and bone. He was hope. And hope was always hunted. The heat had broken by dusk, but the desert air held no mercy. Maria's vision blurred as the mule slowed beneath her. Her fingers lost grip on the reins. Her breath came shallow and quick. She had pushed too far. Too long. She should have stopped hours ago. The horizon tilted, spun, and then darkness. When her eyes fluttered open, she did not see the night sky or the endless sand, but a low wooden ceiling, rough-hewn and quiet. The scent of clean water, firewood, and dried grass filled her nose. A blanket covered her, thick and warm. Her boots, dusty and cracked, had been placed beside her, soles newly stitched. Her satchel rested nearby, untouched. She sat up fast, a jolt of panic rushing through her chest. Her hand went immediately to her belly. The baby kicked in protest, still alive. She scanned the room. It was a modest shelter, a way station or maybe a bunkhouse, half buried in the sand, worn down by time but still standing. The fire in the hearth had burned low, and beside it sat a tin cup of water, still warm to the touch. And then she saw him. A man stood just outside the open door, back turned, watching the orange sky bleed into the first stars. Broad-shouldered, weathered, motionless in that patient, soldier's way. He wore a coat the color of old dust, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. A rifle leaned casually against the wall beside him, untouched. She reached for the knife in her boot, only to find it had been placed just within reach on the stool next to her. Not stolen, not hidden. Offered. She cleared her throat. He turned. His face was older than hers by at least a dozen years, lined with sun and war and silence. A deep scar curved beneath his left ear, barely visible beneath the beard that shadowed his jaw. His eyes were pale and unreadable, not cruel but not soft either. "You're awake," he said simply. "Where am I?" Her voice cracked. "Half a mile from dying, last I checked." He walked in slowly, set down a small kettle near the fire, and poured her a fresh cup of water. "You passed out near the edge of my north trail. Mule was ready to drop. Figured I'd bring you in. You didn't ask who I was." He shook his head once. Didn't seem polite. She stared at him, unsure if he was simple or dangerous. "Why help me?" He met her eyes for the first time. His gaze wasn't sharp, but it was steady enough to quiet her instinct to run. "I don't need to know your name," he said, but I wasn't about to leave a woman ready to give birth in the middle of the dust. Her breath caught. The words landed like stones in her chest. "You're not afraid I'm trouble?" she asked. He looked at her for a long moment, then shrugged. "Everyone out here's trouble. Just depends on what kind." He turned to leave, pausing at the doorway. "There's bread and jerky on the table. I'll be back before sunup." "Wait," she called after him, suddenly overwhelmed by the stillness, the safety she hadn't expected. "What's your name?" "Thomas," he said. "Thomas Reed." And then he was gone, swallowed by the twilight. Maria sat in the silence, holding the cup of water he'd left her. Warm, clean. No questions, no hands grabbing, no threats. Just a needle passed through her busted boot, a fresh blanket, a knife left by her side. And the words of a man who looked at her, not as prey, not as a problem, but as someone still worth saving. She whispered into the quiet, to the child still nestled within her. "We might have just found a place to breathe." The days stretched long and quiet on the edge of Thomas Reed's land. The ranch stood against a backdrop of soft hills and endless sky, its fences leaning slightly with age, its fields golden in the late summer sun. The silence was not oppressive, it was watchful, patient, the kind of silence that gives a soul space to breathe. Maria stayed. Not because he asked her to. Because he did not. Each morning, she woke to the scent of bread baking or saddle leather being mended. She began sweeping the porch, gathering eggs, helping the cook chop vegetables from the garden behind the bunkhouse. She moved slow but steady, her belly growing heavier with each passing day. Thomas said little, but when he spoke, he looked her in the eye, never down, never past her. He never asked what she ran from, never touched her arm unless handing her something, never came close without giving her room to step away. But it was the small things that disarmed her most. On the fourth morning, she stepped out to find a chair waiting on the porch, newly built, with a slanted back and a thick leather cushion. Not factory-made, crafted by hand. She ran her fingers along the grooves of the wood, then sat down slowly. The seat took the pressure off her spine and hips instantly. She turned to the window. Thomas was at the fence line, mending wire. He didn't glance her way. Just kept working like he hadn't just offered her comfort without saying a word. Later, she found him polishing tack in the barn. "You made that chair?" she asked. He didn't look up. "Seemed like you needed a place to rest." Maria hesitated. "It's perfect." Thomas only nodded. "Good." She felt it again, this growing sense of safety that wasn't handed to her, but built one small, wordless gesture at a time. For the first time in months, she let herself laugh, soft, honest. She started humming while she worked, singing softly to the child inside her. Even the cook, a stout older woman named Clara, began calling her sunshine, despite the shadows Maria still carried. But peace, Maria had learned, was never free. One afternoon, as she collected laundry from the line, she heard spurs dragging in the dirt behind her. She turned and froze. A ranch hand, new younger, face half hidden under his hat, was watching her too closely. "Too long." He smiled, slow and familiar. "Took me a minute," he said, voice slithering through the air, "but I knew it had to be you." Her blood ran cold. He pulled his glove off and wiped dust from the corner of his mouth. Maria Cortez. Alive and breathing. That'll make some folks mighty interested. Her hand went to her belly without thinking. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said flatly. "Sure," he grinned. "And I suppose the child ain't the last piece of a dead man's treasure." He tipped his hat. "You sleep tight tonight." He walked away like a man with time. Maria stood frozen, heart pounding. She had no proof. No idea how long he'd been watching her. But one thing was certain he knew. And if he knew, others would know soon too. That night, Thomas found her sitting on the porch in the chair he made for her face pale in the moonlight. "You all right?" he asked, leaning against the post. She looked at him, her eyes wide, full of the storm she had tried to outrun. "I think one of your men is going to get me killed." Thomas didn't ask who. He didn't ask why. He simply nodded once, eyes narrowing toward the darkened bunkhouse. Then he walked down the steps, the boards creaking beneath his boots. Maria sat there, not knowing what he would do, but knowing he would do something. The sun was barely past its peak when they arrived. 3 men, all dressed in black coats and wide-brimmed hats, rode up the long dirt path to the ranch like vultures circling a carcass. Their horses were lean, restless, and marked with the scars of hard travel. The leader, tall and sharp-eyed, dismounted first. His spurs jangled as he stepped forward, boots kicking up dust that clung to his coat like ash. Thomas Reed stood at the top step of the porch, arms crossed, jaw tight. Maria watched from the kitchen window, her hands clenched around a wooden spoon, eyes never leaving the strangers. "We're looking for land," the tall one said. "Heard this spread might be for sale." Thomas said nothing for a long breath. "Then, you heard wrong. Everyone's got a price, Mr. Reed." Thomas's eyes didn't flicker. Not everyone. The men exchanged glances. The second rider, shorter, wiry, spat a dark stream of tobacco into the dirt. "Nice place. Big house. Real pretty porch." His eyes slid toward the window. Maria stepped back. Thomas didn't move. "You've had your look." The third man, older, grizzled, nodded once and pulled his reins. "We'll be around, Mr. Reed. Things change." They turned and rode out slow, deliberate, like they wanted the dust to settle in everyone's throat. From the shadows of the barn, one of the ranch hands watched them go. He waited until the last hoofprint faded before slipping inside the main house. Maria was still at the window. He spoke low. "I know that one. The short one. Used to run jobs out of Santa Fe. Worked for Bounty Crews. Worked with the Cortez gang." Maria's breath caught. Thomas, standing nearby, said nothing. Just turned and walked out the back door. That night, the ranch settled into a tense, uneasy silence. Clara locked the doors earlier than usual. Maria couldn't sleep. Something was wrong in the air, thick, expectant. And Thomas was gone. He had taken his rifle, his horse, left no note. Midnight passed. Then 2. Then 3. Maria sat in her chair, wrapped in the blanket he had left for her weeks ago, heart pounding like it knew something her mind did not. Just before dawn, she heard the sound of hooves returning. She rushed to the window. Thomas dismounted slowly. His coat was torn at the sleeve and a dark stain trailed down one arm. He walked with a slight limp but upright, alert. And on his hip the revolver was still holstered, unsmoked. Maria met him at the porch. He looked up at her, face unreadable. "I took a ride." "To where?" He looked past her, toward the breaking horizon. A place where the air was wrong. She stared at the streak of blood drying on his sleeve. "It's not mine," he said simply. Her voice was barely a whisper. "What did you do?" "I made something clear." He didn't say more. But miles away, at a run-down way station tucked near the canyon pass, 3 black horses wandered riderless. Their reins had been slashed. Saddles gone. A tree at the edge of camp bore a strip of rawhide nailed into the trunk. On it, scrawled in blackened charcoal, "The woman here is under my protection. Return, and blood will follow." Inside the bunkhouse, 3 men lay groaning, disarmed and humiliated. One had a broken wrist. One had lost his front teeth to the butt of a rifle. The leader, his pride, the worst wound of all. Back on the ranch, Maria saw something on Thomas's face that shook her more than anything else. He wasn't proud. He wasn't angry. He was tired, but resolved. "You risked your life for me," she said. "I didn't ask why you came here," he replied. "But I'm not letting a woman about to bring life into this world face death at my door." Cow Trial 3 settled between them like a truth too sacred to touch. The next day, the sky cleared, and the wind was gentler. No more riders came. And Maria, for the first time in years, did not sleep with a knife beneath her pillow. The late summer air had turned crisp. Mornings came slower now, wrapped in a low fog that clung to the valley like a blanket left behind by the heavens. It softened everything. The sharp clang of a hammer, the whinny of horses in the paddock, even the way sunlight filtered through the porch slats, casting gold across the worn wood. Maria sat quietly on the porch. A skein of soft wool pooled beside her, her needles clicking steadily as she shaped the beginnings of a blanket. Clara had handed her the yarn with a knowing smile, the kind older women wore when they saw something forming that others had yet to name. Her belly was round now, full and firm beneath the folds of her cotton dress. The baby kicked more often these days, sometimes strong enough to make her pause mid-stitch and smile through the ache. She had started humming again, low, tuneless melodies that floated into the open air like feathers. Just beyond her, Thomas was oiling his saddle. He had already mended 2 fence lines that morning, and now he worked in silence, cloth moving in slow, practiced circles across the worn leather. His coat hung over a post. His sleeves were rolled. The scar beneath his jaw caught the light, just barely visible beneath the peppered beard, but always there, like a story half told. She had never asked about it, not because she hadn't wondered, but because silence had always been their first language. A cup of water left by the door, a blanket folded on a cold night, a carved chair built for aching bones. Their trust had grown in gestures, not confessions. But that morning, the fog held something different, a quiet invitation. So she asked,
"How did you get that scar?" Her voice was soft, not pressing, just open. Thomas didn't look up right away. He finished rubbing down the leather, then folded the cloth with care and set it aside. Slowly, he shifted back, sitting on the edge of the porch, his boots stretched long in the dust, hands resting loosely between his knees. "New Mexico, 1867, he said after a pause. "I was stationed near Fort Stanton, still wearing blue back then." She waited. "I got a letter. Said my wife and son had taken the wagon to town and never came back. Took me 6 days to get home." His jaw tightened. His gaze stayed fixed on the trees. They were already buried. Maria's hands stilled over the yarn, her heart tightening with the weight of something deeper than grief. It was the sound of memory still bleeding.
There'd been a raid, Thomas continued. 2 men in stolen Union uniforms. Thought they'd find gold or rifles. Found a woman and a 6-year-old instead. He ran a hand over his face, slow and weary. "I came back to a headstone and a house burned down to the bones." "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely a breath. Thomas gave a small nod, the kind of nod people give when they've heard that phrase too many times to believe it could change anything. "I tried ranching after that," he added. "Bought this land because it was empty. Figured if I was going to be alone, I'd rather do it where nothing reminded me of what I lost." Maria looked at him then, not at the scar, but the man beneath it. Not as a flaw, but as a wound still breathing, still deciding what kind of life to grow around the pain. "I didn't know what kind of man you were," she said. Thomas finally looked at her. She met his eyes. "But I've never known a man who didn't touch me when I was weakest. Not one." He said nothing. "You brought me water. You fixed my boots. You gave me a place to sit when I felt like my back would crack in 2. And you never once laid a hand on me unless I needed help standing." The truth hung in the air like wood smoke, heavy, lingering. "I lost everything once because I couldn't get there in time," Thomas said at last, voice low. His eyes held hers, pale, clear, steady. "I won't let it happen again." Tears burned behind Maria's eyes, but she blinked them back. Instead, she reached out, slow and certain, and took his hand in hers. Calloused, strong, real. She guided it gently to her belly. The baby kicked. Thomas startled, just slightly, but didn't pull away. His hand remained, trembling with a kind of awe she hadn't expected to see on a man so solid. They stayed like that. 2 people who had lost too much, finding the courage to hold something new. And Maria knew then, with every beat of her heart. Some scars are not meant to fade. Some are meant to be seen, so you never forget who you became after the breaking. It was a dusty noon when the messenger came. He arrived on a bay horse, coat wrinkled, badge of a northern county pinned crookedly to his vest. Clara saw him first and called for Thomas. Maria stood on the porch, hands on her belly, as the man dismounted, removed his hat, and unfolded a yellow document from his saddlebag. His voice was official, too official.
"I'm looking for a woman by the name of Maria Cortez," he said. "Warrant's been issued. Accused of aiding and abetting a known outlaw and evading lawful arrest."
He glanced down at the paper, wanted alive, reward posted, considered dangerous. Maria felt the world tilt beneath her boots. The baby kicked hard, like it knew. Clara stepped forward. "You must be mistaken. There's no one here by that name." Thomas's voice cut through the air like a blade. "There is." Everyone turned. "She's my wife," he said. Maria's breath caught. Thomas walked down the porch steps, calm as always, but something burned behind his eyes now, something sharp, ancient, and immovable. "You tell your men," he said to the messenger, "that they're chasing the wind. Maria Cortez died in the desert." The man blinked. "And who am I speaking to?" "Thomas Reed, owner of this land, husband to Maria Reed. That child she carries bears my name. This is my family." The silence that followed was deep enough to hear the flies buzz. The messenger hesitated. "That changes jurisdiction, but if it's a lie—" Thomas stepped closer. "You want to question me, you do it in front of a judge, in town." The messenger swallowed and nodded once. "I'll report it." He left with dust in his wake. Maria stood frozen, the porch rail digging into her palm. That evening Thomas took her into town. The courthouse was nearly empty, just a clerk, a justice, and a deputy nodding off in the corner. Thomas gave them names, dates, told them of their life together, their intent to raise the child in peace. He spoke few words, only the ones that mattered. "She's not a criminal," he said. "She's a woman carrying the future. That should be protected." The judge looked them both over, then stamped the paper with a hard, deliberate thud. Maria Reed. Da. It was done. But the real moment didn't come until the ride home. The sun was setting, stretching golden ribbons across the trail. Maria rode beside Thomas in silence, her mind still catching up with what he had done. "What you said in there," she finally whispered, "wasn't true." "It was," Thomas replied. "But we're not." He pulled his horse to a stop, reached into his coat, and drew out a bundle of soft cloth tied with leather string. He handed it to her. Inside was a headscarf, handmade. The stitching was uneven, but careful. Blue thread looped across the fabric, weaving a name, Reid, in letters small and sure. Maria stared at it, her throat tight. "It's not a ring," he said. "It's not a promise." She looked up at him. "It's not the world," he added. "I can't protect you from what you were, or what they think you are. But I can protect you here. If you choose to stay." She touched the fabric like it was something holy. "I didn't ask you to save me," she whispered. "You didn't have to." Cow Trio 5 hung between them, quiet and powerful. She tied the scarf around her hair, fingers shaking. And in that moment she did not feel claimed. She felt seen, not owned, but chosen. By a man who offered no ceremony, no vows. Only a name. And the safety of someone who meant it. The storm rolled in just after midnight. Not one of thunder or lightning, but of pain, of breath, of sweat and resolve, of life clawing its way into the world with the ancient cry of every mother before her. Maria gripped the edge of the bed, her knuckles white, her dress damp with exhaustion. Sweat streaked down her temples, soaked her collar. Clara knelt at her side, her voice steady and low, the way a river is steady when guiding something sacred through sharp rocks. "Breathe, girl. You're close now. One more. He's almost here." The room was dim, lit only by the flicker of an oil lamp that threw shadows on the walls like ghosts too awed to speak. The wind outside whispered through the eaves, brushing against the wooden boards like fingers from another lifetime. Thomas never left the porch. For 18 hours he paced, quiet, deliberate, unyielding. Boots creaked over weather-worn planks, back and forth, a rhythm born of worry and helpless devotion. He didn't speak, didn't knock, didn't ask for news, he simply stayed. His rifle leaned against the wall beside him, untouched. His coat hung from a nail by the door. But it was his eyes, those pale, storm-worn eyes, that never left the space between him and the woman behind that door. Hands clasped behind his back, shoulders hunched like a soldier in a battle that offered no clear enemy, Thomas waited for something he could not shoot, build, or break. And then, finally, it came. A cry, not hers but his. A sound fierce and full and high, piercing the silence like sunlight through heavy clouds. He stopped mid-step. Inside the room, Clara held the newborn up to the light. A boy, strong-lunged and pink-skinned, his tiny fists balled as if ready to fight the world. Maria collapsed back onto the pillow, her breath ragged, her body trembling. Tears spilled freely, her chest heaving with the weight of everything she'd carried, and everything she had just let go. "He's strong," Clara whispered, brushing a hand gently over the baby's hair, and loud. Maria let out a broken, breathless laugh. "He's alive." Clara wrapped him in a clean towel, humming softly as she cleaned him. Maria turned her head slowly toward the door, expecting Thomas to burst through, to rush in with wild eyes and questions. But no one entered. And then she noticed it. Something small, something humble, had been placed just beyond the threshold. A wooden horse. Not store-bought, not polished, but hand-carved, rough around the edges, its stance frozen mid-gallop, as though it too had been racing toward something long-awaited. The mane was painted with dark streaks, and etched into the base, precise, careful strokes carved with intention, was a name. Samuel Reed. Maria's breath caught. She reached for it with trembling fingers, pulled it to her chest as if it were made of gold. The wood was warm, the edges smooth. Every inch of it carried the weight of time, patience, and love unspoken. She began to cry, not from pain, not from exhaustion, but from something older than both. From gratitude, from awe, from the simple, overwhelming truth of being seen. Clara stepped back, silent, letting the moment unfold. Maria looked down at her son, his eyelids fluttering, his fingers twitching, then to the name carved into the wood. Then finally, to the man waiting beyond the door. The man who had never asked for anything, but had given her everything she didn't know how to ask for. "I was once a shadow in a thief's world," she whispered, her voice cracking. "But now I'm the mother of a boy who carries a name born from light." She held Samuel close, rocking gently, tears spilling freely. Outside, Thomas sat on the porch, hands clasped, head bowed beneath the soft glow of a lamp. And for the first time in years, the house no longer felt haunted. It felt like home. Autumn came with golden leaves and quiet joy. Maria walked each morning into town, Samuel wrapped snug against her chest, a basket of books and slates swinging gently in her hand. The small schoolhouse had been unused for years, its walls tired, its benches dusty, but under her care, it came alive again. Children's laughter spilled out the windows. Chalk dust danced in the light. She never called herself a teacher, but the children did. Some of the townsfolk looked twice when she first arrived. Some whispered. But whispers faded. And kindness, when lived long enough, speaks louder than any rumor. Thomas never asked her to stay. And Maria never told him she had chosen to. But each night, as dusk settled over the hills, he lit the lantern in the window. Every single night. The glow waited for her, like a promise he never needed to speak. Like a lighthouse not for ships, but for hearts trying to find the shore. Samuel grew fast, feet kicking, eyes wide, laughter loud. He crawled after chickens, tugged at Thomas's beard, and once tried to chew the corner of the carved horse that still sat by his bed. Thomas built him a cradle, then a chair, then a swing. Maria planted lavender near the porch. She mended shirts, taught math, read aloud under the trees. The past, with its fire and blood and betrayal, no longer ruled her. It simply existed behind her. One evening, as the sun dipped low and Samuel slept in her arms, she stepped onto the porch and found Thomas sitting there, as he often did, silent, watchful, whole. She sat beside him, resting her head on his shoulder. No words passed. None were needed. They had never spoken of marriage, never of tomorrow. Only of now. And that, somehow, was enough. In the hush that followed, Maria looked out over the land, the fences she had helped mend, the trees that now shaded Samuel's laughter, the sky that no longer looked like something to run from. And she thought, this is what staying feels like. Later that night, as Samuel slept in the room with his wooden horse and carved name, Maria sat by the window and wrote in her journal, her own words, in her own hand, for no one but herself. "I was once a widow running from gunfire and lies. Now I live beneath a roof where every beam, every nail, was placed by hands that asked for nothing in return. I do not carry his name because of a vow spoken before men. I carry it because it was the first name I ever chose. When I finally chose myself." She closed the book, blew out the lamp, and walked down the hall to where the man who had waited for her every night still sat, lantern burning, quietly lighting the way home. If this story moved you, if you felt the dust, the danger, and the quiet strength of love that asks for nothing but presence, then ride with us again. At Wild West Love Stories, we bring you the untamed passion and enduring hope of a land where hearts had to fight just as hard as guns. Subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to never miss a tale of grit, grace, and the kind of love that does not shout, it stays. Wild West Love Stories. Where the West was wild and love was real.